Green Man. I don't know why people cannot understand that antinatalism is a rational as well as a moral position for human beings.
But Julia, first tell me, what do you mean by the term antinatalism? Just to avoid ambiguity and further discussion.
It is the belief that giving birth and procreation of sentient being is morally wrong.
I see. Why do you think it's morally wrong, Julia?
You tell me then why it's not morally wrong?
Julia, when you state a position of view about some belief, then it is you who needs to provide evidence on behalf of the position. It does not make sense to ask somebody else to prove the opposite position of the position you hold. That's called the burden of proof. So, tell me why antinatalism is rational to you?
Okay. When a child is born, we see them throughout their life going through sufferings. Sufferings that is unavoidable. Struggles to cope with the society. And then finally the pain and suffering of the death. All these sufferings can be avoided if the child is not brought into existence. Thus, I believe bringing them to existence is obviously an immoral act of the parents. Don't you agree, Green Man?
I understand. Now, besides those sufferings, they also have pleasure and joy of life. They can happily lead their life, and in some cases they can contribute to the society for betterment of others as well. So, in that case, in fact, someone can argue that bringing them is rather an obvious moral act. How do you attack this argument, Julia?
At the first place, if the child was not being brought into existence, we don't even need to think about those joy and sufferings or whatever complexities they goes through. So, why not avoid bringing them into existence and living them being in a complex world?
Suppose hypothetically, a child who will be a great scientist and will invent a revolutionary medicine that will save millions of people's lives. Suppose that child also will pass a happy, joyful life himself. Now, in this situation, if someone argued that not bringing that child into existence will be morally wrong, would you agree with that argument, Julia?
No, I would not agree. It's because we do not know what will happen to the child before we bring them to the existence.
But then with the same argument, you should not agree that bringing them into existence is also morally wrong. It's because we do not know what will happen to the child.
Okay. I understand your point. But there is another perspective. We do not take any consent from the child before they were born about whether they like to be in existence or not. Then it would be a violation of their rights. No?
What right would be violated, Julia?
Rights to freedom of choice?
Look, Julia. The concept of rights is a human construct contract to maximize pleasure and minimize sufferings of the humanity collectively. All those rights are assigned to a person only after their personhood. Before a child is born, the concept of their rights does not exist. And thus, there is no violation of rights to the entity before it comes into existence.
I see. So, antinatalism is a moral standpoint?
Not yet, Julia. We cannot conclude that antinatalism is an immoral standpoint. So far we have seen that all the arguments we can deduce for antinatalism can be applied against antinatalism itself. Thus, we cannot say it is immoral. At the same time, we cannot say it is moral. This standpoint is often called amoral.
Green Man. I have another argument. All of us needs to acquire knowledge to lead our life in the universe. Acquiring these knowledge is a bitter approach and involves so many efforts which makes people more into sufferings. Is that not enough to justify the position for antinatalism?
Not really, Julia. One can show you that there exists at least one person in this universe who enjoys acquiring knowledge throughout his or her entire life. Your argument would be easily debunked.
But Green Man, don't you agree that in the universe there are more sufferings than the pleasure of humankind? Do we really need to care of the pleasure for few people against sufferings for many while making such arguments?
Julia, if there is a single case for which antinatalism is not immoral, then saying it immoral as a general argument would be fallacious. You would automatically put those few cases in special set. And by doing so you would be doing a special pleading fallacy.
I see. But I really can't believe antinatalism is not immoral. There are a plethora of contexts in society where we really need to reassess those arguments carefully.
I understand your perspective, Julia. Actually, a better position of view would be not an antinatalist, rather than a position in which you carefully evaluate contextual social aspects and then decides whether for that specific context bringing children into existence would be immoral or not. That's what would be a true rational position.
Yes. Now I know what would be really a rational position to hold. Thank you so much, Green Man, for helping me to correct my belief.